Greetings from Germany. I am very sorry that I could not be there in person with you today, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak in this way. Aaron and I moved to Cambridge at the same time in 2005, and Aaron was really the first close friend that I made in the city. During my first few years in Cambridge, Aaron was one of my favorite people to scheme with. We started and then usually abandoned a whole string of projects. We would argue for hours and hours about sociology and economics and technology and ethics. And I remember one time I took Aaron to the Boston Vegetarian Food Festival. Aaron was not a vegetarian, but we went to see a talk by Peter Singer, who is an ethicist at Princeton and who I think a lot of people credit as sort of the intellectual founder of the modern animal rights movement. Aaron went up to Singer after the talk to ask him if we, that is to say humans, had an ethical obligation to keep animals from hurting each other. And as Aaron approached Singer, I just sort of shrunk back a little bit. I guess sort of embarrassed. The question seemed, I don't know, kind of trollish. And I figured it would just annoy Singer. But to my surprise, Singer sighed and he thought for a little bit and then said something like, yes, if we could do it without causing more suffering in the process, I suppose we should. And that's sort of the Aaron that I knew, a recklessly sort of creative intellectual who refused to be hemmed in by what most of us would just take for granted. And in that process, he was also someone who was always thinking about the greater good. Now, Aaron and I mostly talked about ethics as they related to a broad set of issues around free culture. Aaron and I were both deeply worried about what we saw as a world where technology and knowledge was and is increasingly locked up and owned and controlled. I mean, think about it. How much of our communication happens through technologies or tools or networks that are controlled by firms that we, the users of those systems, don't trust at all? How much of our understanding of the world and the things that we read in books or journals or newspapers are under the control of people that we don't trust? And what, and more importantly, might a more democratic alternative look like? Now, Aaron, over the 8 years that I knew and worked with him, was one of the most effective individuals working towards better answers to these questions. And I think that the Singer story illustrates something that my friend Daffith said a few weeks ago, which was that Aaron had this rare ability to not just think or work within a system, but to think and work with the system, right? Aaron wouldn't just play by the rules, he would play with the rules. Now, at a memorial for Aaron in San Francisco, Brewster Kahle talked a bit about how Aaron had helped download hundreds of thousands of public domain ebooks from Google and to upload them to the Internet Archive. Now, when Google digitized public domain ebooks, which are in the public domain, they decided to make them available, but not too available. That is, you could search them and sort of walk through them on the web, but you couldn't put them on a hard drive and send them to a remote village with no internet connection, which is something that people at one laptop per child routinely want to do, and that lots of other people want to do. That's just sort of a Media Lab reference. There's some rate limiting that Google applies so that you can only download the public domain books slowly. And so Aaron, apparently, figured out a way that he could, figured out how fast he could download them, and a way that he could download them on a bunch of computers at exactly the maximum possible speed for years. Years. And hundreds of thousands of books, public domain books, are now where they should be, freely available. Now, one time I met up with Aaron in Kendall Square. He was hanging out right outside the Cambridge Center food court. And he thought that maybe if he was on the Google guest Wi-Fi, which you can get just sort of standing outside of their office building in Cambridge Center, that it would count as an internal IP and maybe he would not be subject to this sort of rate limiting. He'd be able to download faster. And it turns out that he was. It didn't really work. But It's a pretty good idea. And that's how I'm going to remember Aaron, right? Thinking outside the box and literally standing outside sometimes, driven to make the world better and enormously successful in doing so. The result today is a public domain, and I think a world which is richer and better because of Aaron's work. And today we're all facing a future that looks darker without him. Now, I find it very, very strange to watch my friend become a rallying cry and a name attached to laws and hackathons and rallies. I feel kind of awkward and disoriented, even though I know, he would have wanted it. But as over the last few weeks, real life has sort of crept back in, I found myself asking in a whole bunch of situations, what would Aaron do? Trying to put myself in a situation where I think with the system, or think about the rules, and then adjusting my own behavior accordingly. And I've talked to some other friends of Aaron's, and I understand that it's not just me who's been doing that. And that thought is super exciting. Because if all of us that knew him and loved him, and if some of us that didn't know him, can act a bit more like Aaron in the wake of his death, it gives us all a lot of reasons to be hopeful.